topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to Triversity Talk. I'm Wendy Stewart, and for those of you who tune in every week, you know that already. So Triversity, of course, is located in Milford, Pennsylvania, and if you are local in the tri-state area, upstate New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, we have different programs, as you know, and this week, December 18th, for our Schmoozing with Triversity. Yes, we have that once a month where you can all get together and schmooze. We're actually showing a film. It's a holiday film. It's called The Bishop's Wife. I am not really even familiar with that film, but it's supposed to be really wonderful. So if you're looking for something fun to do, you can mosey on to our center on Thursday night and catch the film. Of course, to find anything that's going on at Triversity, just go to our website or our Facebook page, and you can find out everything that you always wanted to know, our events, upcoming everything. And let me just take a moment to wish everyone a happy holiday season. Here we are, and Christmas is coming up upon us. We're in the middle of Hanukkah. We celebrated Kwanzaa. There is a lot going on. And I am going to be taking a 2-week hiatus. That's right. I'm not going to someplace warm and fabulous. We'll be doing 2 reruns of shows for December 25th and December 24th, Christmas Eve, and then New Year's Eve, because I need a rest. It's been quite a year. But you know what? I love ending the year with a bang, right? So my guest tonight, very excited about, was very intrigued by the title of his book, 6 to Carry the Casket and 1 to Say the Mass. Growing up Catholic and queer, how do you forge your own path, and what do you keep and what do you let go? That's quite a dilemma. For those of you who watch this show, we've talked a lot about religion on here, a lot about being Catholic. This debut book by this author explores carving out a space for oneself in a world that defines us. Please give a warm welcome to Bill Hulseman.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And this is Nugget.
Hi, Nugget.
It's amazing. The minute the show starts, Nugget becomes my co-host. So I hope you
That is a dog who wants the spotlight. I love it.
He's a dog that wants the spotlight. And you had a rat terrier at one point.
We did. My husband had Stella since she was a puppy, and she sadly died about 3 years ago. But I got to bond with her. I was the step parent who bought her love with bacon, and we bonded. And
you bonded over bacon. I can't.
Well, that's the way to a dog's heart, right?
Right.
And during the pandemic, we just spent so much time together, and then it was hard not to feel so connected to our little pup. But but she was old and she declined, and so it was hard to say goodbye. But it's been a few years.
It's hard to say goodbye, but they stay. They stay with us in many ways. I always say, if I meet someone and they tell me they don't like dogs, I'm sorry, that speaks about who they are.
That's all you need to know.
That is all I need to know, and then we're done. So, Bill, your book, this is your first book. I know you have a blog. I know you're a writer, your background as an educator, but this is your first shot really out of the bag with a book. What was the thinking behind it, and why essays?
Thank you for the question. Why essays? Because essay writing is the form of writing that I'm I'm best at, I'm most familiar with, I'm most comfortable with. And it never started as a book project. I didn't intend to set out and write a book. Instead, I went through a major life transition, and it gave me an opportunity to sit still for a long time. So, and that's where I started writing to process my experiences. So, I started my job as a middle school principal, but in 2015, and 2 days before the first day of classes, my mom died after a long illness. And so that first year, I never got my feet on the ground, right? And then I thought, my year number 2, this is going to be the year. I'm going to figure it out. And my sister died very suddenly right before the school year started. And then my dad, who had been ill for a while, died a couple months after my sister. And so I was doing the hardest job I'd ever done. I was swimming in grief, and I totally burned out. And so after a few years, I took a year off to do nothing but heal and be and figure out and clear my head so I could figure out what was next.
Right. What's next?
And as part of that, I started writing, to process my experiences. I wanted to understand how I landed in that place of burnout, and what were the experiences that like I was holding on to, or what did I want to carry forward with me? Of course, I took my year off starting in 2019, and then 2020 happened. And then everybody burned out. The whole world burned out.
This story is highly personal and so incredible, because you got what I call the triple whammy. Many people get the double whammy, mother and father or whatever. But, your mom, then your sister unexpectedly, and then your dad. That's a lot. I talk about grief a lot on this show. I lost my husband 2 years ago, and I personally felt I was looking for an in-person support group. Nothing. And it's a topic I do like to talk about. So you're swimming in grief.
And swimming in grief, and then the whole world then stops. And so I wanted to understand, how did I land here, but how did we all land here? And, I was grieving so much, and I was processing that, and I was looking around, and I think, one of the things that I recognized was a real lack of tools for processing all the grief that we were all experiencing. I grew up, I was lucky to have these tools of reflection at my fingertips. It was really important in the way that my parents engaged. It was great in school for me. I loved reflecting. So it was always my mode of processing things. But then in 2020 and following, I was seeing a deficit. Like, does nobody know how to reflect? And so I really started writing these essays and putting them into my blog, into my newsletter, as a way to offer a model for reflection. Well, one friend was very kind and said, have you ever thought about putting these in a book? These are great. And I thought, oh, that's really nice, but no. And then the second friend said, have you ever thought about putting these in a book? And I said, oh, that's nice, but no, thank you. And then when the third friend said, what about putting these in a book? I said, okay,
I love it.
I trust my friends. They're onto something. They're seeing something. So I started stepping back and seeing a collection of essays that was really about identity. And I was grappling with, here's this moment where the whole world has an opening for transformation. We're devastated, and we've got to move forward. So what do we want to hold on to? What do we want to let go of? And all these essays, I was doing it for myself too. So I wanted to understand who I wanted to be and what I needed to do to get there.
I get that they were self-reflection, but while you were doing self-reflection, you were actually putting it out there for the rest of the world. You were seeing what other people were going through as well. That's really interesting place to end up in, because think of where we were all at during the pandemic. For many, it was immobilizing. For many creative people, it was very freeing. They could really create. For me personally, I had to completely reinvent myself, which I didn't love doing. But it was certainly a time when we could sit and say, WTF, what the heck is going on? Because we never experienced this. I couldn't wrap my head around it. And I've worked in places like Africa near Ebola areas. And I'm like, how did this happen? And the fact that it was happening all over the world, but you're another person that actually are coming on here and telling me how you used the pandemic to really put yourself through another portal and end up in another place.
That is such the right word, portal.
It
I
is.
was inspired, early in the pandemic, in early April 2020, Arundhati Roy, the author, she's an Indian author. She wrote The God of Small Things. And
Oh yeah.
anyway, she wrote an essay called The Pandemic is a Portal. She saw what was coming, even in April 2020, before the total devastation was really wrought, right? And she wrote this essay saying, in history, pandemics have always, yes, great devastation, but they also provided an opening. Things
Right.
change. You fundamentally, things are challenged and shifted.
Yeah.
So as we go through this, she said, here's the opportunity to look. Do we want to drag everything through that portal, or do we want to leave? She uses really powerful language. Do we want to leave the carcasses of our dead rivers and our spoiled ground? Can we leave that behind, or do we want to drag it with us? And so I took that as a kind of a personal challenge, and it helped me, early in the pandemic, to have that as the frame of like, okay, yeah, this is going to be hard,
Right.
but what is the opportunity here for what can we start letting go of? What can we start picking up? And so I think that was all that, seeing it as a portal. I think people who saw it as a prison, it made it that much harder, right? But if we could see it as that portal, if you could see it as, okay, this is terrible, but what are we going to do with it? I think that was a blessing to be able to have that kind of framework to experience.
Now you came into the pandemic with all this grief too.
Yeah.
You were carrying that. So if we're going to talk about transformation, and I think you understand what that is, if we want to talk about transformation, you were already transforming. I mean, you had such colossal personal loss.
Yeah.
And then you were burnt out, and you came into this pandemic, really ready for all the things that were going to come after, and again, you were open vessel. I'm sure that author that you just quoted that predicted what she did, she would understand the concept of open vessel. And there you were. And people were telling you, hey, you know what? This stuff that you're writing, this could be a book.
Yeah. And so that's where it turned into a book project. I was able to, I was able to connect with Peanut Butter Publishing here in Seattle. It's a little independent publishing house.
I love the name. That's a shout out to
I know. Well, so I did a workshop on how to write and publish a book, and I was sending the manuscript and I was sending excerpts and a proposal out to find a literary agent or a publishing house, and I got no bites after a couple months. It was going to be a full-time job just to
a full-time
land
job.
Something. And then I was sitting at a stoplight here in Seattle. I was sitting at a stoplight at Green Lake, and I was listening to NPR, and a sponsor spot came on saying Peanut Butter Publishing now accepting manuscripts from at any stage of the editing process. And I thought, I have a manuscript and I like peanut butter, so maybe that's a good sign. And then the next day I checked them out. You sent an email, and then within, I think, a day, I got a call back, and the process started moving forward. And I worked with a wonderful editor, Daniel Harvey, and the whole team at Peanut Butter was really wonderful to work with. And the fact
that it came through the car radio,
I know.
Listen, you're talking to someone that totally believes in this stuff 100%. I've got friends that are like, come on, Wendy, nobody's talking to you through the car radio. I believe, like, even if you put the remote on the TV and a certain something comes up.
Yeah.
I have these things happen to me all the time. Let me just tell you, I take them in and I follow them. And you are proof. You're proof that it works. Peanut Butter Publishing was looking for you, right?
I'll give you another one in terms of that synchronicity. Like, is it just an accident, or is the universe trying to tell us something? When my husband and I were getting ready to go on a vacation, before we were married, before we were engaged or whatever, and that whole week, every day, I was seeing ads or something about, weddings and things like that. And I apparently was thinking about, like, oh gosh, are we going to get married? Is this the trip where we're going to make that decision? Right? And then I'm driving to work that day, and I look up, and there's an old theater that's an event space, and on the marquee it says "Marriage on Your Mind." I was like, okay. This is
that's
too on the nose. And sure enough, we came back from that trip with the plan to get married, and so that it was really like, I don't know whether the universe was sending me the message or whether I was just opening my eyes and looking that direction, it was the
You know
same
what?
kind of
That's a good
feeling.
point. I don't. Okay, so let's just say some of us are more open to this than others, and
Mhm.
you probably were open, and boom, then you saw it,
Yeah.
right? But
In
but
Catholic
you,
language, we call that the work of the Holy Spirit. It's like like the
yeah.
Holy Spirit is working. We just have to pay attention and get on board.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting to me. You grew up Catholic in
Mhm.
a big family. I've had a lot of people from the LGBTQ community come on and talk about how negative it was for them growing up Catholic. For you, I don't seem to even get that
Mm.
vibe a little bit. What was it like?
I had a really positive experience of religion growing up.
Yeah,
And I
please share.
recognize that. And I have lots of friends who had very different experiences. And I'm not saying like, oh, that can't be true. No, I recognize that mine is probably not the common experience among queer folks. But yeah, I had a very positive experience of religion growing up. My parents were very devout Catholics, but when we say devout Catholic, that conjures an image that's associated with conservatism. It's like, they grew up in the pre-Vatican II church during the time of what we call liturgical renewal, and that was all these kind of modernizing efforts in the church,
In
and
the
a
Catholic
and a,
Church.
and a key piece to it was a commitment to social justice and engaging the gospel with the lens of look at the problems of the modern world. And what does the gospel have to say to us about that? That's what we need to focus on. And so the Catholic social teaching was very important to my parents, and commitment to justice, commitment to care for the poor and the marginalized. That was part of the faith conversation for them. They didn't grow up in a church that said exclude people. They grew up in a church that was welcoming and open. So that was what they raised us with, engaged in the tradition, but with this outlook that
Right.
that this is what faith is about. My mom also was always really clear about a key piece of Catholic theology that I think a lot of Catholics don't get. And it's it's the idea of the primacy of conscience, and it's this idea that our conscience is that part of us that is closest to God, and when our conscience is ringing a bell, that's what we need to listen to, not the local authorities, not peers, not. And my mom used to
Yes.
say, no, not even the Pope. Who is he? He's just another priest. So if your conscience is telling you, you need to listen to your conscience. So for me, when I came to understand what my sexual identity was and what it meant and the implications, because even
Yeah.
at a young age, I was aware of like, oh, hey, well, this is not safe. This is not cool.
Right.
But I knew it was right. It was never a conflict for me. And even when I came out to my parents years later, I was 20 when I finally came out to my parents. I used that language and they understood it. I said, my mom's first question when I came out to her, she said, well, what about what the church says? What about the church teaching? I said, well, I know that my conscience tells me that
My
this is how I was
conscience.
created. And so I don't feel that conflict. It's just not there for me. And
What
that
did
was
you
compelling
say?
for her. She couldn't, she couldn't argue with her own teaching.
Right.
but
Right.
it was, and while it was hard for her to transition to, but she did the work. She started my parents went to the PFLAG chapter that was at our local parish. I didn't even know our parish had a PFLAG chapter.
This is such a great story. I love it. It's just filled with such positivity,
Yeah.
support.
And so, when I came out to my parents, the first thing they did, they went to their priest. They went to the pastor, and the pastor said, Bill's a good kid. He's got a good head on his shoulders. Why don't you join the PFLAG or come to a PFLAG meeting? And my mom was like, there's a PFLAG meeting? And this was our pastor at this Catholic parish. And like, so that's the world that I grew up in. And so when I started, teaching, I started teaching religion in high school level. I was campus minister. I was basically a professional Catholic. But I was also, gay AF. So it was for other people, it created a conflict. And it was always interesting. People, other Catholics would be like, oh gosh, can you be gay and Catholic? I didn't know that was a thing. And other queer people would be like, can you be gay and Catholic? Is that of it? So
Well,
from
I know
both
I'm
sides,
hoping
people didn't understand
this is
because they
amazing.
didn't ask the question of like, what was the religious experience for you? They just make an assumption that religion is bad. And I get it. I understand that it certainly can be. But if you start with the assumption that somebody's profound experience is bad, you're never going to get anywhere in learning about, who they
Right.
are, engaging, how do they see the world, and
Right, 'cause you're
how can
shut
we be in
down.
dialogue with each other,
This
So
concept of conscience, though, I haven't heard this, and I'm very interested in this.
Mhm.
If I take that concept of conscience and I look at what's going on, in the United States right now, and the really bad things in the trans community, bad things to people that have been living in this country
Yeah.
for a very long time, and then they're being picked up and sent back, and they've been working here the whole time. To me, with that word conscious, people should be completely up in arms and say to this administration, have you no conscience?
Mhm.
Because I look at it, and
Mhm.
that's what it makes me want to say. Have you
Yeah,
no
yeah.
conscience?
And you know who I would recommend listening to or paying attention to
Yeah.
is the nuns. The nuns on the bus has been very popular in the last decade in terms of their activism, their protest. But the proper term is women religious, what we call communities of women religious, and women religious
Yes.
communities. Uh, they have always been at the forefront of the inclusive arms of the church. It's the
It's
France.
so important.
My aunt is a Benedictine, and they are committed to social justice and inclusion. I worked in Sacred Heart schools, which are completely committed to justice and social action at every level. The nuns, when the question of blessing same-sex unions in the church came up, the nuns were the first ones who stepped up to say, yes, we want this. This is right. This is just. Nuns like Sister Janine Gramick, who co-founded New Ways Ministries with Bishop Tom Gumbleton. She was kicked out of her original religious community because of her commitment to this ministry, to make not trying to convert queer people, but like make an inclusive space for them and try to build dialogue with the mainstream church. So like, those are the people that I like to pay attention to when it comes to the Catholic questions. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, never mind what the conservative parishes are doing, never mind what the pro-life activists are doing.
Exactly,
What are
right.
the nuns doing? Because they have committed their lives, they have committed their careers, they have committed their community life, their family life toward a vision of the church that is inclusive and loving. And so,
Right.
when it comes to, where do you see the conscience most at work? I see it in
With the nuns.
communities of nuns. I mean, it's amazing the work that they do and the commitment along the way. I include an essay about nuns in the book, and so they're always on my mind. I grew up with them.
But
They've
that's
always
so
been a
what
positive
nuns
influence.
are always on your mind.
Nuns are always on my mind because well, I mean, I've got nuns in the family. We've got,
Right.
I'm interested in seeing, how
You are such an
religion is
incredibly
affected
positive spokesperson for Catholicism on this level. And no, I'm not kidding you, because
yeah,
we love the Methodist Church. They've done so much with inclusivity. They've brought in certainly a lot of LGBTQ Catholics that,
yeah,
couldn't find what they needed. But yet I have you on as a guest, and you're opening up, right, a whole other
mhm,
way of, it's not just looking. You have
yeah,
actual proof that this exists. And you know
yeah.
what? Bill, it's a very positive thing that you're sharing. I like
Thank
this.
you. Now, I do want to qualify and clear. Uh, I'm no longer practicing with Catholics. I still identify as Catholic. I don't feel I'm not interested in converting to anything else, but I haven't been to church for a long time, and that's because the church and I are in a big fight, and the church doesn't know it, and I need them to apologize. I got to a point, especially working in Catholic schools. I had a moment that really changed everything for me. I was, teaching and working. I was an administrator in Catholic schools. I'd been doing campus ministry, and so I was the face of the church for so many of my students. And for most of my career, I thought, okay, I can bring my perspective. This kind of positive approach toward Catholicism, the emphasis on conscience and social justice. This was all driving, my work and the lens that I was working with. But it got to a point where I went to a conference and I heard Dan Savage speak. Dan Savage, the sex writer, columnist, podcaster, he's wonderful.
Yeah.
And he was talking, I mean, this is 2012, 2013. And he was talking about the It Gets Better project that he and his husband Terry started to collect videos, to be able to get up on YouTube, to get to queer kids, to say it gets better. It's hard now. but it gets better. And in response to, the spike in suicides among queer teens. So it was a packed room. Everybody wanted to hear Dan Savage speak. Everybody wanted to hear about this project. It was really, really powerful. And he's a great speaker. And then the Q&A started. And somebody got up and asked a question on behalf of somebody else who couldn't even stand up and ask a question in that setting without risking their job. So somebody got up and asked this written question. I'm a queer person working in this conservative religious school. What advice do you have for someone like me? How can I better support my queer students? And everybody in the room is nodding along. Yeah. What,
Sure.
What can we do? What can we do? And he took a moment and he cocked his head and he said, "You're not going to like my response." He said, "You need to get your resume in order." And everybody in the room was like, "Oh." He said, "You think your presence there is sending a message to kids that they're safe, that someone like them is keeping an eye out for them. But the message that you're really sending is that it's okay to leave part of yourself at the door on the way into work."
Wow.
And in that moment, my entire self-understanding as an educator completely exploded. I couldn't unhear it. And I had never thought about it from that direction. I never thought about it that way. And I could never unhear it. I burst into tears. I'm sitting there next to my boss. I have this reaction. And she just turns and says, "We're going to need to talk about this, aren't we?" I said, "Yeah, we're going to need to talk about this." And that set my path to get out of Catholic schools.
What was your moment of truth? Wow, that is a moment of truth.
It was a complete. So I also I wrote an essay that's in the book called Dan Savage Ruined My Life. And it tells that story in greater detail, particularly what leading up to it and what that, the fallout for me personally. But it was completely transformative of opening my eyes to I think I had been consciously or unconsciously putting my queer identity, subjugating my queer identity to my religious identity. I think I had always sort of okay, well, Catholic first because I'm a Catholic school educator, and that's got to be first, and the rest of life can catch up later. I think I avoided or put relationships on hold, all sorts of things that I didn't realize I was doing. And then Dan Savage turned my head around, and I started seeing so much of this differently. It helped me prioritize my queer identity and say, yeah, you know what? I think I've been self-loving this whole time, but I think I've actually been a little self-hating. And this is an opportunity to really embrace my queer identity. And I'm sick of fighting for change in the church, and I'm not going to go unless I feel safe. I'm sick of fighting for change in the church. The burden rests on straight people who have authority within the church to make the changes. I know how I was created. I have my vision of the world and my faith.
You're fine with you, but
it's not dependent on other people. But it does really sadden me that this piece of my life is gone. I'm not part of a religious community anymore. It's too painful. It's too painful to return. So it's I'm really happy to present a different approach to understanding what is the Catholic experience for queer people. Because I had so many positive experiences, and even as a gay teacher and campus minister, it opened a door for me to have conversations with kids that nobody else could have because they didn't have this lens. It helped me be more empathetic to any of the kids who felt marginalized in any way, and because they knew me as the gay campus minister, they knew that I would get it to some extent. So it made me a better educator. But at a certain point, I just couldn't take it anymore. It's just exhausting. It's exhausting when you're constantly trying to explain yourself. And I'm sick of it, So I don't think I ever gave myself permission to put my foot down. And this was finally, I got to that moment of okay, I don't have to do this anymore. It's not my problem. So I'm going to stop trying to fix it.
You believed in the Catholic Church for so long. You were an educator within it. You were openly queer within it. I'm just curious why that moment of truth. I know Dan Savage said what he said, but it did hit you like a lightning bolt. Was it inside of you the whole time? I mean, you went to Fairfield University. I was reading everything about you. I'm like, oh my God, Fairfield University and a gay man. Okay, we have to talk about this. You hit like every milestone of what it means to be a good Catholic, so to speak. And then all of a sudden, it's like, I can't do this dance anymore because even though that's my background, it is not who I am. I am a queer man first.
You know, Fairfield was a great test case in terms of how things have changed over time. I graduated from Fairfield in 1998, so I was there mid to late 90s. And when I got there, I got to college thinking, I okay. Let's start with high school. I went to a Jesuit high school, and there was all boys, 1,500 boys in this school. So you can imagine what it smelled like. On the first day
like a locker room.
On the first day of school, I was coming down a stairwell, and another kid was coming the other direction, and he spotted me and grabbed me by the collar and threw me up against the wall and spit the word faggot in my face. And then he just dropped me and kept walking. For him, it was probably just like, once a day, gotta punch down on someone, right? But for me, it was like, well, I guess I'm not coming out in high school because that was all. And I still have that scar. I still bear that scar. I think, anybody who's had that moment like that, it's terrifying and it really lasts. Yeah. So I'm a good Virgo, so I was able to compartmentalize. I said, okay, we're waiting until college. Got to college, I came out to friends, I was never really in a closet in college, so it was a different world. But I was at Fairfield. I felt safe. I felt included.
Right.
But I could count on two hands the number of people who were out on campus. It was, 25 or 100 or 3,000 students, and maybe 8 of us were out on campus.
So 10 people were out, right?
But bit by bit, each year I was there, there were a couple more people who were out, and there was a group of us who was really active in, creating safe spaces, pushing the dialogue. We were always writing editorials into the student paper about, challenging assumptions, things like that. So it was, by the time I graduated, I felt it was a queer friendlier place, but it still had a lot of work to do. Now, I went back to a reunion for my core. I sang with the university chorus, the Glee Club, and that was a very formative piece. And our director was retiring, so they had a big concert and party to celebrate her retirement, and brought all these people. So it became the Glee Club reunion for us, and it was great. The Glee Club was kind of a GSA as well. Like a lot of us kind of drifted toward theater and music, and we found each other there. So it was also a kind of a queer reunion too. Well, one of my best friends and one of my first friends from college, my friend Allison, who identifies as a lesbian, and she and I, we go back and we're walking around campus, and we go to the student center, and we're flabbergasted because there in the middle of the student center, first of all, there's the multicultural, Office of Multicultural Activities, or I forget what the name of the program is, with a giant updated pride flag, with the chevrons, including the black and brown and trans colors, So that alone, we turned to each other like, that's not anything we would have expected,
No, that had to really
smack you in the face, college. Right? So and what I hear on campus is that it is a more progressive and more inclusive place, that it's not a problem to be out on campus, but like anywhere else, it's still got a lot of work to do. So
it's interesting how much changed. So from the time that you were there, so your husband, after you went through all this grief, you met him after that.
Yeah, we met just after my dad died, and just as I was starting to fall apart.
Well, the Holy Spirit spoke, as you said earlier.
That's right.
This person was sent into your life, and you've had so many interesting epiphanies to me, which I guess is reflected in these essays in your book. You have an essay in particular I wanted you to talk about the significance of the Christmas tree and, what it makes us all remember.
I thank you for asking about that. I wrote an essay in the book called How to Put Up a Christmas Tree. and it was inspired. The second Christmas my husband and I were together, it was 2020, and we'd been in quarantine all year, and we got a new tree. And the process of getting a new tree and then sort of thoughtfully merging, our ornaments and the ways that we approach the holidays and things like that, we were able to be really thoughtful about it. And the process of putting up the tree, I started imitating my mom, which I do in most of my life, consciously or not. But I started imitating my mom. My mom used to, we'd haul out all the ornaments, unpack everything, and we'd kind of lay them out so you could kind of see your family history. It's a different kind of slice of way to tell your family history across the room. And then, certain ornaments were ours. If there was something that was given to me or made by me, it was responsible. I was the one to put it up on the tree. And every time we put an ornament up, someone would tell a story about it, or so it became a way to preserve family history. And it wasn't just good stuff too. It was like hard memories came up, and when I sit with a tree, all of those holiday memories come up for me. And I tried to capture, and it felt kind of, as I started writing about it, it was stream of consciousness. It wasn't linear in any way. It's just all these memories and all these feelings start swirling when you sit and contemplate. It's not just a piece of decoration. It's not an accessory to your room. It's a living history of what is the life that you want to reflect on? What do you want to think about? The darkest time of the year, what's going to bring the light out for you?
They're hooked into feelings, and they're hooked into incredible memories. And the older you get and the more ornaments you collect, the more precious they really become.
Yeah. And so putting up the tree was just always since then too, it's become a really thoughtful process for my husband and me to very thoughtfully. This has become a lovely tradition for us in just a few years. Of like assembling our history. And we're now consciously, when we take a trip, we try to remember to bring an ornament back from it. And that's, we want to start tracking things on the tree. He makes comments once in a while like, oh, well, it's going to get really crowded at some time, so we're going to have to edit some out. And I'm horrified by that thought.
You just need to tell him you need to get a bigger tree. Just buy a bit. You know what? You're out of Seattle. They've got big trees in Seattle.
We might have to get a second. We might have to get a second or third. So the writing that essay was really lovely for me. So I had all the stream of consciousness, but like a Virgo, like, nope, I want to impose some order over it. So I break it down into 5 steps, which are not real steps. Like one of the steps, step 2, pick a theme to inspire your tree. The theme is Christmas. Don't overthink it. So, the steps are, in 5 easy steps, how to put up a tree. But it's really more about how to pay attention to the traditions that you incorporate into your life. And so you're not just going through the motions. I think there's more value when you use that as a different way to reflect. Putting up a tree is a way to reflect as a family, or as a household or as a community. Anything like that, lighting candles at a birthday party, instead of just going through the motions, like, what a great moment to stop and pause and think about, what is it we're all paying attention to? What is the story that we're telling ourselves about what this means for this person or for all of us? So I think,
would you say that a lot of the essays in the book are about this reflection, being able to reflect upon what are our feelings, what was happening at this moment, what does this make us think about? Because often as people, we race through all of that. What you're saying is, I guess, stop and smell the roses.
Stop and smell the roses and the manure. Okay, you can't you can't ignore the manure. And that's also part of the process, is getting comfortable with, for me, that was an important part of the process of being honest with myself about, the book's title comes from an essay about my mom and my relationship with my mom. And, and that's there are a lot of happy memories that I want to preserve with my mom, but there are also a lot of really tough memories that I needed to work through. It's no good to let go of the tough memories, but instead I wanted to give them justice and give them room too. When you stop and create those moments where you can pause and just contemplate, what does this mean for me? You make a decision. What do I want to hold on to, and what do I want to let go of? And I think that's how we change. That's how we transform ourselves. Is it's not some big aesthetic change. It's not some dramatic thing. It's those little choices that we can make. What are we paying attention to? What are we holding on to? What are we letting go of? And it's a lot easier to kind of become the people that we want. It's easier for me to become the person I want when I move through life making those small choices.
But you are very fluid, like this whole conversation, the words you use, right? Choices, moving, the things that make you feel a certain way. That's a very fluid thing. A lot of people hang on to the past, right? No matter how painful. And we can start talking about forgiveness here. They can't forgive, and they're very, very stuck.
Yeah.
And they can't move. What would your advice be to people like that?
If you're stuck, therapy, number one, like ask for help. It's when you're stuck with those feelings, with those memories, with the painful stuff, whether it's a therapeutic relationship or whether it's a friend or whether it's another family member who can just hear you, it doesn't help to hold on to them. Right. On the other hand, it doesn't help to ignore them. It doesn't help to push them away. It doesn't help to try to quash them. It also doesn't help to dwell in them and to obsess over them. So it's about sitting still, figuring out what you want to take, from it moving forward. So if there's grief, if there's painful memories, it's good to hang on to the painful memories, but think about what that means to you. For me, I include a lot in the book and in that essay about my mom, about her drinking and about my parents' alcoholism. That's not something I want to forget.
A whole other thing, because you have such a strong, positive connection to your parents. How did the alcoholism affect you, and how did you turn it around to continue to love them on the level that you did?
Writing these essays really helped me with that. I think after, by the time they died, I think I had made peace with them individually. My mom had stopped drinking. My dad had had a series of strokes, which inhibited him from drinking, so he couldn't drink anymore. So the last few years of their life, they weren't drinking. And it was a different quality of conversation. It was, you could stick around after dinner because it wasn't going to turn into a nightmare. So I think by the end of, we didn't talk directly about it because, Irish Catholic, we don't talk directly about things. No.
Tell me
but
that.
We talked around it enough to make peace with it. And but I still had a lot of things that I was angry about. And writing through it and thinking about it, just walking through those moments and trying to remember, what did I feel at that time? Where is my anger coming from? Do I want to hold on to this? Do I want to let go of it? And can I, and what can I hold on to? What am I going to grow? How am I going to grow from this? And that's how I moved through it. And I was able to get to a point where I could really let go of the pain that I associate with my parents drinking. I also recognize what I learned. I learned a great deal about people. They were going through their own pain. They were going through their own hardships. And I didn't, as a 12-year-old, I didn't know that. But
no, we don't see
as
it.
an adult, I can, in retrospect, imagine what my parents were holding on to. They had 10 children. They had a lot of responsibility. They had their own grief. As their parents were dying, they had their own stuff to deal with. So in retrospect, I can look back and I can heal. Interestingly, though, as much as I made peace with my parents, or my memory of my parents, it stirred up all sorts of anger with my older siblings. I'm the youngest of 10.
I was going to ask you, the youngest of 10, I
watched them watch me get into the backseat of the car, and my parents drove drunk, or, the number of times, one time a couple of my siblings tried to do a little intervention and didn't tell me about it. I was not involved, and I could have told them everything.
Right.
But I was totally off the radar. And I think I look back to that now, and I'm so angry. Now I've got all this new anger that I want to work through with my siblings. But it's something I want to work through. It's something I want to attend to. I feel pretty righteous about it. I think it's okay to be angry with them in retrospect. That
until you work everything out, and you may not work everything out.
I might not, and it's okay, and that's okay. But all I know I can do is control like how I respond to it and how
Yeah.
I frame it, how I understand it. Yeah, but it is an interesting thing. I thought I was going to be putting all this to bed, and yet it stirred up this whole new,
No, not when you're
watch
writing. So
mess
these
for me.
essays are so personalized. But
Mm.
even, you know what you said to me on this show, your parents went to PFLAG. That's huge. You know,
Yeah.
that it is. It's huge.
And if you had known my parents, you would know how huge it was. So my my mom's response was, we're not folding chair people, but we went and we had a very nice time. That was her way of saying, like, we don't sit in circles and talk about our feelings. Like, we're not
Right.
folding chair people.
No, I love that.
But
That's a great phrase.
despite that, they stuck to it. And that, I think, that as much as anything inspired hope for me.
So we've only got a few minutes left. I want to talk about your wedding business and how you got involved. I know we talked about the signs that you saw that was saying weddings. How did you become a ritual designer?
Yeah.
And I never heard that phrase before, ritual designer. There
aren't many of us.
I've heard wedding planner. But
yeah.
What defines a ritual designer?
Yeah. My academic background is in the comparative study of religion, and my focus was always ritual and how we use ritual in cultural, religious settings, how we use ritual to shape relationships and build community. I think it's a really powerful tool. And, I would do weddings for friends who were doing something interfaith, or they grew up Catholic, but they weren't Catholic, but their family still needed a Catholic feeling ceremony. They didn't know what to do. So I did things like that for friends. I would help design a ceremony as an experienced ritualist and liturgist. And I got I got ordained by the internet so I could officiate. And then when I left education and I was listening for the clues of like, what direction do I want to head next? Yeah. I went back to my first love of ritual, and I kind of hung a shingle outside the door with the thought of, okay, well, I've done this for friends. Can I do this for strangers too? And it's been really, really wonderful. So over the last 5 years, I work with couples, most of whom don't have a tradition to draw on, either because they're excluded from it or they're distant from it.
Wonderful.
Or they want to do something thoughtfully intercultural or interreligious. But my goal is always to collaborate to design a ceremony that is authentic to the people at the center, that reflects their experiences, identities, and values. And most of what we associate with the American wedding, those practices are rooted in very different places and times. Like, I look at the typical American wedding and I see 19th century Protestant theology. I see medieval and Renaissance royal court culture. And I see the vestiges of a radically misogynistic, society and when weddings were an elaborate sale of a woman from her father to her new owner, her husband. So I think it's worth combing through those traditions and saying, I think those traditions carry the values with them. And so combing through and say, well, what do you really want in this moment? You want to create your own little ideal moment. Right. How do we make sure it's authentic and it resonates and aligns with your values? And so that's been the work that I've been focusing on the last few years, and it's been a real joy to me.
I can tell it's a very joyous
to play with and be creative with, and especially with queer couples. It's an exciting thing to work with queer couples and to comb through and say, you don't have to imitate a hetero ceremony.
Right.
We can create something new and authentic, and so it feels familiar and doable, but
it's yours.
It's yours.
It's yours.
It's ours, and it's something we can contribute to.
Well, you'll be happy to know I got married on Halloween, and my bridesmaids were all drag queens, and that is true. And I did that way before anybody was thinking about ritualistic weddings. I had to make it my own. It was not going to be anything typical.
That's wonderful.
Right. So there you have it. So, my God, we can look forward to a book on weddings. Yeah.
That's literally the next project. I'm working on it now.
That's great. I definitely have to have you back.
I'd love to. Yeah.
To do that. How do people get your book? How do they find out about your book?
All information about my work and about the book are on billhulseman.com, my website. You can search for Six to Carry the Casket on bookshop.org or Barnes & Noble or Amazon, or you can go to your local independent bookstore and ask for it. It's available anywhere you buy books. So yeah, but all information is on my website, billhulseman.com.
And I have to tell you, the title of that book, brilliant. On the title alone, because I get a lot of people that pitch me, and when I got that, I'm like, oh, this is really. I'm not Catholic, and I'm like, this is a really cool title.
Thank you. I hope it draws people in. It's funny when the book went up available on Amazon. I went to, I was excited to see it up, and then it said you might also be interested in, and it was all books about death and funerals and grieving. I'm like, that's not what the book is about.
Probably put that up there. Don't take it personal, really. Yeah. It's Amazon. So I always like to take a parting shot before I go of my guests on my computer.
Great.
So cheese. You have been a pure delight to converse with. I wish you so much luck with your book. And there's my final thought. These essays are so highly personal. I think as a minister, as an educator, you have influenced lives in such a great way where people would come to you and want answers by producing this type of book. People are going to read those essays and shake their heads and say, I remember feeling that way.
Thank you, Wendy. That's very kind.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Have a wonderful holiday. And thank you for being on the show.
Chag Sameach, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Good Yule, Blessed Advent, and a Happy New Year to you and everybody who's watching.
And you're funny too, which is great. All right. Thank you, everybody who tuned in tonight, and have a wonderful holiday. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Raring to go. Take it easy. Bye-bye.